The Christmas tree was still up. I know that sounds like a strange thing to notice, given everything that happened that week. But when I think back to that morning, the morning everything changed, that's the first image that comes to me. The tree in the corner of my son's living room, light still blinking, slow and lazy, even though Christmas had come and gone 4 days before. A few needles had fallen onto the skirt underneath. Nobody had swept them up. I had driven 11 hours from Savannah to get there. My name is Loretta. I am 67 years old. I worked 31 years as a registered nurse at Memorial Health, and when I retired, I thought the hard part of my life was behind me. I had raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband passed. I had buried my mother and my older brother in the same calendar year. I had survived things that would have broken a different woman. So when I packed my overnight bag that December and drove north to spend the holiday week with my son and his wife and their 2 girls, I was not expecting anything to go wrong. I was expecting turkey and laughter and my granddaughters showing me whatever they had gotten for Christmas. I should have paid more attention to the needles on the floor. My son's name is Derek. He's 41. He works in commercial real estate and does well enough. His wife, Shauna, has never worked a full-time job in the 12 years they've been married, which is their business and not mine, though I've kept that opinion quietly to myself. Their daughters are 9 and 11. The girls are sweet. That has never been part of the problem. I arrived on the 28th of December, a Sunday, around 6 in the evening. Derek met me at the door, took my bag, gave me a hug that felt a little distracted, like he was thinking about something else while his arms were round me. Shauna was in the kitchen. She came out and said hello and went back. The girls ran to me and held on, and that part felt like it always did. Dinner that night was leftover ham from Christmas and a pot of green beans that had been sitting in the refrigerator too long. I didn't say anything about that. I helped myself to a small plate, sat at the kitchen island, because the dining table was covered in wrapping paper and boxes nobody had cleared. And I listened to the girls talk about what they'd gotten and what their friends had gotten, and whether it was better or worse. I laughed in all the right places. Derek was on his phone most of the meal. Shauna watched something on a tablet propped against the fruit bowl. I told myself everyone was just tired from the holidays. That's what you tell yourself. The bedroom I stayed in was the guest room at the end of the hall. It has a nice enough bed, a quilt I'd given them years ago that I recognized from the stitching, and a window that looks out onto the backyard. That first night I lay there listening to the house settle and thought about nothing much. I was glad to be with my grandchildren. That was enough. The next morning, Monday, I woke early the way I always do. I used to start shifts at 5:30, and my body never forgot. I went downstairs in my robe and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the quiet around me. The tree blinked in the other room. Outside the window, the yard was grey and frost-stiff, the way Georgia gets in late December. Not dramatic, just cold and still. Derek came down around 8. Shauna came down around 9:30. Breakfast was everyone getting their own. I made eggs for the girls when they came down and nobody thanked me, which was fine. Children forget. I made a second pot of coffee because the first had sat too long. That afternoon, Derek said he needed to run some errands and asked if I'd watch the girls for a few hours. I said of course. Shauna went with him. They were gone almost 4 hours. When they came back, they brought take-out containers from a restaurant I didn't recognize and set them on the counter, and Shauna said, "Help yourself, Loretta, there should be enough." And they took their plates upstairs, and I fed the girls at the kitchen table and ate what was left of something that had clearly been an afterthought, in terms of quantity. I'm not a woman who requires fuss. I want to say that clearly. I didn't need a formal place setting, or candles, or my name called first, but I am a woman who notices things. 31 years in a hospital will do that to you. You learn to read a room. You learn that the way people treat the details tells you something about what they think of you. The details were adding up. Tuesday was more of the same. I helped with laundry. I read to the girls. I walked to the end of the block and back because I needed air. Derek and Shauna came and went. Meals were whatever was available. Nobody sat down together. I started to feel less like a guest and more like a fixture, something placed in the corner of the house that nobody really looked at directly. That evening, after the girls went to bed, I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. The lights were low. Derek and Shauna were in the living room talking in the kind of quiet voices that stop when someone walks in. They stopped when I walked in. Shauna smiled at me. Derek looked at his hands. I said good night and went upstairs. I am 67 years old and I was not born yesterday. Wednesday morning I was up before dawn. I couldn't sleep well anymore, not in that house, not with the feeling that had been collecting in my chest like weather. I put on my robe and came downstairs and sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I was not snooping. I want to say that plainly. The folder was on the table. It had been there since the night before. I had seen it but hadn't touched it. It was one of those brown accordion folders, the kind Derek uses for business things. It had slipped open at some point in the night. Or maybe it had been left that way. A few pages had shifted out of the pocket, not fallen exactly, just loosened. I could see my name. Not Derek's name. Not a business name. My name. Loretta Ann Beaumont. I sat with my coffee in my hands for a long moment. I am not the kind of person who acts before she thinks. I set the mug down. I pulled the folder toward me carefully, the way you move something when you don't want to disturb the air around it. I opened it. It was a durable power of attorney form, partially filled out. Derek's name was in the section for the agent. My name was in the section for the principal. There were notes in the margins, written in Shauna's handwriting, which I recognized from birthday cards over the years. The notes referenced a financial advisor, a date in January, and something circled twice that said access, all accounts. There was also a printout from a law firm's website. A section was highlighted. It explained how a durable power of attorney remains valid even if the principal becomes incapacitated, and how it can be used to manage bank accounts, investment accounts, and real property. I sat with that for a long time. I am a retired nurse. I spent my career watching people's families make decisions for them, sometimes with love, and sometimes for other reasons. I have sat in hospital corridors and listened to relatives argue over care plans and insurance payouts and who gets to make the call. I know what a power of attorney is. I know what it is used for, and I know what it can be misused for. I had not been asked about any of this. I had not been told. I had not declined. I had simply arrived for Christmas, and none of this had been mentioned while Derek was hugging me at the door, or while Shauna was saying help yourself to the takeout. I closed the folder. I set it back exactly as I had found it. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and did not cry. I am past the age of crying about certain things. Instead, I sat very still and thought carefully, the way I used to think through a patient's chart when something wasn't adding up. I thought about the hushed conversation in the living room. I thought about 4 hours of errands and the name of a law firm on a printout. I thought about access. All accounts circled twice in my daughter-in-law's handwriting. I thought about what I had. I have a house in Savannah, mortgage-free, that I have owned for 22 years. I have a pension from the hospital. I have a savings account and an investment account, modest but real, the result of 31 years of early shifts and missed vacations and brown bag lunches. I have a life insurance policy that I have been paying into since Derek was in middle school. I am not wealthy by any measure that would make the news, but I am stable, and what I have is mine, and it took everything I had to build it. I picked up my phone. I opened my contacts and found the number for my attorney, a woman named Beverly who handled my estate planning when I retired. I didn't call yet. It was not yet 6 in the morning. I just wanted to see the number. I wanted to know it was there. Then I texted my younger daughter, who lives in Phoenix and who I hadn't wanted to worry. I kept it short. I said, "Call me when you can. Don't tell Derek." She called me back in 11 minutes, which told me she had been awake. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mom, come home." I said I would, but not today. Not yet. I needed to understand something first. I came downstairs that morning and made breakfast for the girls like nothing had shifted. I made pancakes, the kind with blueberries because the older one loves them. I poured juice. I listened to them talk about a show they were watching. I laughed when they were funny. Whatever was happening with their father was not something they had any part in, and I was not going to let my face show them anything that wasn't true about how I felt about them. Derek came down around 8:30. I handed him a cup of coffee and watched his face for something. I wasn't sure what. He looked tired. He looked the way a person looks when they've been carrying something they don't know how to put down. I said, "Did you sleep okay?" He said, "Yeah, fine." "You?" I said, "Fine." We stood in the kitchen for a moment and I thought about all the mornings I had made him breakfast before school. I thought about the year I worked double shifts for 3 months straight so he could go to the summer program he wanted. I thought about sitting with him in a waiting room at 17 when he was scared about something he didn't want to tell me, and I didn't push. I just sat. Because sometimes that's what a person needs. I thought about a lot of things standing in that kitchen, and I kept all of it behind my eyes. He poured his coffee and went back upstairs. That afternoon I called Beverly from the car, parked 2 blocks from the house. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had found. She asked me several questions, calm and precise, the way good lawyers do. She asked about my current documents, my existing will, my existing power of attorney, my beneficiary designations. We went through everything. Then she said the thing I needed to hear, which was that nothing had been signed yet, and that meant nothing had been changed, and that meant I was still in control of everything. "But you should come in," she said, "soon, and I'd recommend making some changes before January." I told her I'd be in her office the first week of the new year. When I hung up, I sat in the car for a few minutes with my hands in my lap. The street was quiet. Someone's outdoor lights were still on from Christmas, a string of white lights along a front porch railing. Pretty and a little sad, the way holiday lights always look when the season is almost over. I watched them for a while. I wasn't angry exactly. Anger takes a kind of energy I've learned to be careful with. What I felt was something more like grief, the specific kind that comes when something you already half knew becomes something you can no longer not know. My son had been planning this. Not violently, not dramatically, no shouting, no confrontation, just quietly, with a folder and a law firm's website and a date circled in January. While I was upstairs sleeping under the quilt I'd given them years ago, I drove back to the house. That evening I told Derek I was planning to leave the next morning, a day earlier than planned. I said I was feeling the drive ahead of me and wanted to get an early start. He said, "Oh, okay, sure." He didn't argue. He didn't ask if everything was all right. Shauna said she hoped I had a good trip back. The girls were upset. The older one cried a little and held my arm and asked why I had to leave early, and I told her it was just a long drive and I needed an extra day to rest before the new year. She accepted that. Kids do, if you say it simply enough. I held them both for a long time. I went upstairs and packed. I moved quietly, methodically, the way I pack. Everything folded and placed, no rushing. I took the quilt off the bed and folded it and put it in my bag. It was mine after all. I had made it with my own hands 20 years ago. I didn't think twice. I lay in the dark for a few hours, but I didn't sleep much. I listened to the house the way I had that first night, but it sounded different now. Less like a house I was visiting and more like a place I was leaving. I was on the road by 5:30. I stopped at a gas station 40 minutes out, got a large coffee, stood in the cold parking lot for a moment just breathing. The sky was still dark, but there was a pale line at the edge of it, the kind that comes just before the actual light. I watched it. I thought about the drive ahead, and the appointment with Beverly I'd already scheduled by text, and the phone call I still needed to have with my son, the real one, the honest one. Not yet. Not today. But it was coming. I drove 11 hours home, and the whole way I thought about what I had built. The house waiting for me. The accounts in my name only. The 31 years. The quilt folded on top of my bag in the back seat. When I pulled into my own driveway in Savannah, it was evening again, full dark, and my porch light was on because I have it on a timer. I sat in the car for a moment before I went in. My yard, my porch, my light. Mine. I went inside and set my bag down in the hallway and went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The house smelled the way my house smells, like the cedar sachets I keep in the closets, and whatever I had last cooked, which I think had been a pot of soup the morning I left. I stood in my kitchen and listened to the kettle begin to tick and heat. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Everything was quiet. The first week of January, I sat in Beverly's office for 2 hours. We updated my will. We reviewed my beneficiary designations on both the life insurance and the investment accounts, and changed them to reflect what I actually wanted, not what had been there by default for years. We put in place a financial power of attorney with my daughter in Phoenix named as agent, someone I trust, someone who had called me back in 11 minutes when I needed her. We discussed a few other things I won't go into, but Beverly called it a clean slate, and that felt right. I have not called Derek yet about what I found. I've thought about it many times. I've thought about what I would say and what he would say and how a conversation like that goes. I know he would have an explanation, maybe even one that was partly true. Maybe he really was worried about my health. Maybe Shauna had convinced him it was practical. Maybe nobody thought of it as taking something from me. I don't know what lives inside other people's reasons, but I know what I saw. I know my name in that folder. I know the notes in the margins. I know what access, all accounts means. And I know that in 31 years of nursing, I learned one thing above everything else, which is that you do not wait for the situation to become urgent before you act. You read the chart. You notice what's changing. You do what needs to be done. I have done what needs to be done. The conversation with my son will happen. I'm not someone who avoids necessary things. But when it happens, it will happen on my terms, in my time, and from a position of stability. Not from fear. Not from the kitchen of a house where I was sleeping under my own quilt while my name sat in a folder on the table downstairs. My younger daughter called me last week just to check in. We talked for almost an hour about nothing important, just life, just the easy back and forth of someone who knows you. Before we hung up, she said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." I didn't ask her what for exactly. I knew what she meant. Some mornings I come downstairs before the sun is fully up, and I make my coffee, and I sit at my own kitchen table, and I look out at my own yard. There's a bird feeder out there. I put up 2 autumns ago. The cardinals come every morning, a pair of them, sometimes 3. They don't stay long, just long enough, and then they're gone. I watch them, and I drink my coffee, and I am here, in my house, in my life, in my name. That's enough. That is more than enough. People ask me sometimes if I regret going. If I wish I had just stayed home in Savannah that December and skipped the whole thing. I understand why they ask. But no, I don't regret it, because if I hadn't driven those 11 hours, if I hadn't sat at that kitchen table in the early morning quiet with my coffee going cold, I would never have seen that folder. And if I'd never seen that folder, I would have gone on the way I had been going, trusting, assuming, filling in the gaps with the most generous explanation I could find. That is what mothers do. We fill gaps with grace until there is no more grace left to give. What I've come to understand is that actions have weight. Not in any mystical sense, just in the plain practical sense that every choice a person makes builds something, a pattern, a character, a track record. Derek and Shauna had been building something for a long time before that Christmas. The distracted hug at the door, the leftover meals, the 4-hour errands while I watched the girls, the quiet voices that stopped when I walked in. None of those things were accidents. They were the shape of how they had come to see me. Not as a person with a history and a life and a right to her own decisions, but as a resource, something to be managed. And I had let it go on longer than I should have because I kept choosing the generous explanation. That's on me. I know that now. Treat us sok, real wisdom. The kind that actually helps you isn't just knowing things. It's being willing to know what you'd rather not. It's reading the room even when the room is your own son's house and what you're reading breaks something in you. But here is what I also know. I did not fall apart. I sat with what I found. I thought it through. I called Beverly. I called my daughter. I drove home. I sat in my attorney's office and I took care of what needed to be taken care of. That's not nothing. That is everything, actually. The ability to feel the full weight of a hard thing and still function, still move, still protect yourself. I think that's what people mean when they talk about strength, though I've never liked that word much because it implies you feel nothing. I felt everything. I just didn't let the feeling make the decisions. What I want anyone to take from Loretta's story, from my story, is this. The people who love you will not hide folders on kitchen tables with your name circled twice. Love doesn't do paperwork behind your back. And if you find yourself explaining away a pattern of small disrespects because the alternative is too painful to accept, stop. Look at what's actually in front of you. You are allowed to see clearly. Seeing clearly is not betrayal. It is the most honest form of care you can offer yourself. I am 67 years old. I raised 2 children and buried a husband and worked 31 years and built something real, and it is mine. The cardinals still come to the feeder every morning. The house still smells like cedar and whatever I last cooked. My daughter in Phoenix calls just to talk. These things did not happen by accident. They are the result of choices I made every day for decades. To show up, to be honest, to do the right thing even when it cost me. That is the only kind of inheritance worth leaving, not an account number. A way of being in the world. Derek and I will have our conversation. When it happens, I will be honest, and I will be calm, and I will not be cruel. But I will also not pretend I don't know what I know. That time is over. The kettle is on. The morning light is coming through the kitchen window just the way I like it. I am here, and I am steady, and I am not waiting for anyone's permission to be fine.